But one thing I will say just around what you're purchasing, for me as a general rule, and again, I've kind of learnt this on my journey, I tend to now only buy houses rather than apartments. And the reason for that is just because even though apartments will always rent and they generally look a bit nicer, these new build ones, but with houses, houses are generally freehold, whereas apartments are leasehold. And what that means is when it's freehold, you kind of own the land of where the property is built on. So you kind of own that land. Whereas when it's leasehold, somebody else owns that land and you're leasing the land off of that company. So what that means as well is that that company will maintain your property as usually a part of a bunch of properties. So say if you see a bunch of new build flats, more often than not, they're going to be leasehold to another company. Like, I don't know, there's loads of them out there, but they will be leasehold, if that's even the right term, to another company. And what it means is that because there's a bunch of flats together, they might do things which will help maintain those flats. So as an example, I mean, I'll give you a real life example. So I've got the first property I bought was in Enfield in North London, and it was a new build apartment at the time, and it was on a leasehold. So there's lots of apartments in that building, and because of that, the leasehold company will order things like window cleaners to come round and clean the windows. There'll be a gardener who will like mow the lawn and like various other things. But what it means to you as a landlord is that you have to now pay what they call ground rent. So it's like you're renting the ground that you're living on. And you're also paying service charges as well, which is basically you're paying for the cost of that gardener and that window cleaner and all the rest of it. And these costs never go away. So sometimes people will look at an apartment, and apartments are generally cheaper than houses. But when you do the maths and you add in the ground rents and the service charge, often they end up costing more. Plus, you never really, in the court of law, own that property because it's owned to the leasehold company. So I hope that makes sense. So service charges and ground rent are also really annoying costs. So I still own that property in Enfield, which is rented out. So I no longer live there, yet every 6 months or so I get a bill going, oh, we changed the locks and you owe us £200. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't even live there no more, you know what I mean? But I'm always paying these service charges and ground rents and stuff. And often, you know, if there's kind of, I don't know, certain types of tenants in there, they might break the door down or whatever because they're not paying for it. And then the landlord ends up getting the bill. So yeah, I would just say, in my opinion, to look at houses where you can over apartments. So any questions on that? I'll keep going. So again, also think about specifics. So when you're looking for properties, if you know you want to go down, let's say, the buy-to-let route, even if you're not going down the buy-to-let route, you want to think about things like even the size of the property. So, you know, I know people who their first property, they kind of bought a one-bedroom flat. You're always going to outgrow a one-bedroom flat. Anyone is going to outgrow a one-bedroom flat, even if you're going to do it as a buy-to-let, you know. So I would always recommend starting as a minimum on a two-bedroom. So that's that. Even if you're going to live in the property, as I mentioned with my example earlier, you would then always have the option to rent a room out. So if you know that, I don't know, you want to take some time off work or you just need some additional income, you know that you've got that room there as an asset to make some money, you know, so that's always handy as well. You also want to think about things like, if you are doing buy-to-let, what type of tenants do you want to have in there? Because then that will determine where you get your property as well. So as an example, if I know that I'm going to have working professionals in my property, I might want to live close to a tube station because they might be commuting to work. Or if I'm going to have families in there, I might want to be close to the schools because I know that they're going to be thinking about those things. So it's just, there's so much little things to think about when you're doing that. But again, as a general rule, if you're close to a station, close to a tube, no, that's the same thing, close to a school, or you got some parking, those are always good things that most people would want in a property, okay? So how do you go about looking for properties? So there's lots of property websites. So you've got things like Rightmove, which is quite popular, things like Zoopla, which is similar. You can go to local estate agents. You can go to developers if you want to. So I'm sure we all experience this because they're just building everywhere at the moment. But if you was to go to somewhere where they're building, they will usually have a sales office there, and you can ask them about, the cost of the properties, etc. And you'll probably find most of the time, because they're still in the building mode, they want to get all of these properties sold. And so you might even get a better deal if you buy it before the property's even finished than if you buy it after it's already been built. So again, with my Enfield place, that's the way that I did it. So it was Bellway Homes who was the ones who was building the properties. Was they building them or just selling them? I don't know, but it was Bellway's Homes. And I remember I just passed it and I kind of had went into the sales office. They showed me around the show home, and they gave me a really good deal just because the properties were not sold yet. So I think I ended up paying about like a 5% deposit, and the guy who sold it to me was kind of pulling all kinds of strings basically to help me get this property, which was great. And yeah, I still have it till this day basically. So you can get some good deals if you do it that way as well. Another thing you can do is auctions. So again, back to homes under the hammer. I do recommend with auctions, go with somebody who's a little bit experienced with auctions, because there's lots of things. I would say probably not to start with an auction. Like do that when you're a little bit more sophisticated within the game, I would say, with reference to auctions. I've written knock on doors as well. So sometimes, you might see a for sale sign outside a house and you might say, do you know what, that seems like a nice house. Let me just knock on the door and ask. And what you'll find most of the time is if you see a for sale sign, let's just say it's, I don't know, Connells or whoever the estate agent is, Foxton, selling the house, they're charging that person a percentage in order to sell that house. So if you knock on a door and say, oh, what's the price? They, it might be advertised at, let's just say 200 grand, but they might say, oh, do you know what? I'll give it to you for 180 if we do it without Foxtons, basically. So you might get a discount just because they've knocked their estate agent out of it. So sometimes that's a decent strategy to use as well. Slightly stalkerish, but also a decent strategy, okay? And then with reference to a lot of these sites, the reasons why they could be quite useful as well is because you can check past prices and also rental incomes as well. So let's say, for argument's sake, you decided that you wanted to buy a property in Birmingham, and you might look and go, wow, okay, this property is only 75 grand. That seems really cheap. Let me get it. You might want to look around the past prices of properties, because if all the properties around the area were selling for 50 grand, then that property is overpriced. So that's something to be wary of. And also you want to check the rental incomes, which you can check on these sites as well. So let's say, for argument's sake, you might say, 75 grand, my mortgage is only £200, that's great. But then if rent is only £150, that's not great. So you want to kind of do your maths and just make sure that what you're purchasing is in line with what other people have purchased as well, okay? And then the last thing, really, I just wanted to point out that there's lots of tools online that can help you. So when you are getting started out in property, most people will first of all go straight to a broker. which is not a bad thing to do, but you can save the broker a lot of time by using some of these tools online as well. So you can already check your affordability if you go to some of the bank's websites, and there's mortgage calculators, so you can check how much you would be paying if you got a mortgage for 25 years. And there's lots of other stuff in here as well. So yeah, I can share some of these with Darren at the end if you like, and you guys can take a look. I put a little image on this page here as well, because this just really shows that sometimes when it comes down to purchasing, we get all very personal and we want to purchase where we know and that type of stuff. So again, a lot of us are very southeast or London based, but the areas outside of London at the moment are going up quite a lot. And this slide just really shows that, I don't know, look, somewhere like Buckinghamshire, which, I don't know no one's background on this call, but let's just, for argument's sake, say that none of us live there. It's gone up 160%, in house prices. So that's massive, And so, this time maybe last year or something, if somebody had bought a property a year ago versus now, they're going to be making a big jump in their equity, and they can do a lot with that money with reference to buying something else if they want to. So there's a lot of this going on at the moment. And again, because of all of this COVID stuff, I would predict, I don't know for sure, but I would predict that the places just on the outskirts of London are going to start going up quite a lot. So I think it'll be a good opportunity to get a property close enough to London where you can commute in, but just out of London, I reckon you can get some good deals. So that is it really. Right, so I can see I've been chatting for quite a long time here. We're on 55 minutes already. So Darren, if I go over time, do let me know, okay? And I'm going to keep going.
Will do.
All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the buying costs, okay? And again, I'm just gonna kind of rush through these slides a little bit. But when it is time for you to purchase, there is a couple of things to be aware of. So we spoke about the deposit already, but something else which is a big deal is stamp duty. Now, again, because of COVID, they've got a new thing where if you purchase anything under 500 grand, there won't be any stamp duty to pay. So that's fantastic. They're only going to do that up until March of next year. And then after that, it's going to revert back to what it used to be, which I believe was 1% up to 250 grand. Something like that. I'll have to check, because they just change it so much. So what that means is, on top of your deposit, you need to find that if it is 1%, you would have to find that additional 1% on top of that as well. And it's basically almost like a tax for the land that you're purchasing, okay? Now, something that they brought in 2016, which has been a real pain for people like me, is that they've brought in something which is called the higher rate stamp duty, which basically means that after you've purchased your first property, you will always have to pay stamp duty, and it will be a higher rate than what your original stamp duty was. So as an example, if it starts off at 1%, which is what it used to be, then the higher rate stamp duty would be 3%. And so for every property you purchase after the first one, you will have to pay 3% on top of that. So this is also something to think about, that that is based on the cost of your property. So on some level, sometimes it is best to buy the most expensive property first, because you know that you can get that potentially underneath your 500 grand, so that you're not paying your stamp duty on that. Or even if it's after March, you would pay the 1%, which would be significantly cheaper than if you did it later on down the line. So just bear that in mind. You would also pay solicitors' fees as well. So when you're buying a house, it's a contract. So you need a solicitor to be able to draw those contracts up for you, make sure that everything is signed and checked and all that kind of stuff. And so you just need to pay a cost for that. On average, that might cost about £1,000 or maybe a little bit under, depending. And then you need to pay for searches as well. And all searches do is it will check everything about the property. So it will check if it's energy efficient. It will check if, I don't know, maybe your area's been flooded before, or there's various things basically that the searchers will check. So you just need to pay for that, which on average again is about £300. And then finally, you would pay for a broker. And you don't have to pay for a broker. You can go directly to a bank and not pay for a broker. But often a broker, as I mentioned earlier, will get you a better deal than a bank would. So in the first instance, maybe ask a broker what they can get, and then check that with the bank and just see which one's better. And if the broker is better, at that point, you can then go to them and pay for them. And it depends. There's lots of cheap brokers out there. There's lots of brokers that will just take a fee out of the final mortgage. But some of them do charge up to about £1,500 as well. So it just depends on what deals and stuff. I've put in brackets DIP and AIP, and what this stands for is either decision in principle or agreement in principle. And what they would do is they will give you that, which is like a piece of paper that tells you that based on what they've seen, i.e. how much you earn, your credit, etc., they can guarantee that you could basically afford to pay for a 300 grand property or whatever. So they will put that down. So when you go to view properties, an estate agent might say, oh, have you got a decision in principle? And you'll say yes, which basically means the broker has verified that I can purchase this property once I find one. So that's basically that. And then there's just a couple of additional optional costs. You don't always need these things, but if you are going down the buy-to-let route, then it's always good to have an accountant who can basically help you with your numbers, just to make sure that you're paying the right amounts of tax, or as little tax as possible. So, you know, a good accountant is good. Also, a property manager is useful. So if you are looking to purchase outside of London, then you want to have a property manager so that they can maintain that property and you don't have to keep driving, you know, far away. So as an example, I've got a couple of properties in a place called Lincoln, which is like the east of England. And it's about probably 3 hours from London. So I've got a property manager down there, and he looks after my tenants. If there's something that needs change, I don't know, let's say there's been a leak, or I don't know, the heating's gone or the boiler's broken, whatever it is, he would just sort that out. And then he would just call me, say, oh, you know, this issue's happened. This is the cost to fix it. Are you happy? And then I say, yeah or no. And then he'll just basically sort it out. And it's just no stress from my point of view. He collects the rent, he pays me, and I just literally wake up on the first of the month and I've done nothing. So it's just great to have one of those sometimes. If you do have a property that's close to you, then you might want to manage it yourself. But again, that goes back to your whole property strategy. If you know you're going to build a portfolio, another question to ask yourself is, do you want to manage that portfolio? Because essentially that then becomes your full-time job. So it depends on what you want and what your goals are moving forward. And the last thing really is just ongoing maintenance. So when you own a property, whether buy-to-let or residential, there's always going to be things that go wrong. As I mentioned before, you know, boilers breaking and heating and carpet needs changing or whatever. So it's just to always think about those things within the cost as well when you are purchasing, okay?